So today let's talk about the NVIDIA 4080 Super and if you should buy it. Now, the 4080 Super is going to be one of the newest NVIDIA GPUs to come out with the overall Super refresh at the beginning of the year. It replaces the original RTX 4080. Let's talk about that one first and why it makes the 4080 Super perhaps a better GPU. Now, the 4080, nothing wrong with it, has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. It's pretty fast overall. It's not quite like a 4090, but the problem with it was the $1199 MSRP, $1,200. That was just way too expensive. Remember, people were used to the 3080 being like $699, even though that GPU was very hard to find during, all of the GPU craze at that time, the shortages. It's still a pretty big bump up when the 3080 12 gigabyte went for about $1,200, and now the 4080 kind of followed and hit that price point. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. So a few points that people really complain about on a new GPU release. It's either something lacking in the GPU itself, like VRAM. For example, the 4070 Ti, which was supposed to be a 4080 12 gigabyte, that one, it really, people didn't like it because 12 gigabytes of VRAM and the much more narrow memory bus meant that when you really pump up the textures in 4K and everything like that, it's going to struggle consistently, and it's a $799 GPU. Okay, it's meant for 1440p, but that's an expensive GPU. So the 4080 didn't quite have that problem. 16 gigabytes of VRAM. The memory bus width was okay, nothing spectacular. Overall performance was good, but the price really was unattractive. And you could see it sat on store shelves while the 4090 sold out consistently. Most people skipped the 4080 and would go for like a 4070 Ti or lower, maybe a 4070, instead of doing the 4080 at all. Now comes the 4080 Super. This has the same 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and now performance-wise, it's actually not that different from the 4080. From the three Super GPUs, this one has the least amount of changes. The 4070 Super got a significant boost in rasterization. It still has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but it performs much closer to a 4070 Ti than the original 4070, and it stayed at $599. So that one seems to be the best value out of the three if you're looking at just getting a fairly decently high-end GPU. The 4070 Ti Super went to 16 gigabytes of VRAM. That shows you NVIDIA knows the 12 gigabyte was a problem on an $800 GPU. At least it stayed at the same price. It's a better memory bus, 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Rasterization wise, it's not that much faster than the original 4070 Ti, but the extra memory certainly helps when you're playing in 4K or using ray tracing or anything that's going to be more VRAM dependent. And then the 4080 Super, it didn't get any really big spec bump. It's just a little bit faster, often within a margin of error from the 4080, but what it did get is a $200 price drop. So MSRP at $999. Now, we have seen them for sale for under that. The cheapest one I've seen is about $949. So here's the question. At this late into the stage of the GPUs being released, is that a GPU you should even consider? Now, the RTX 50 series, like the 5080 and 5090, those are still at least maybe 6 months away, close to 2025 somewhere. They might be announced at the end of this year, but we're probably only going to really see them in the beginning of next year. So it's not like they're going to come out next month. So if you want a high-end GPU, the 4090 is really exorbitantly expensive still. They're basically $1,800 to $2,000 for the most part, the models you're going to find in stock everywhere else. Like, you can find them, at least they're not sold out, but they're a little bit too expensive. So that leaves the next high-end GPU, if you want NVIDIA that is, we're just talking about NVIDIA and not AMD, that's going to leave the 4080 Super. Now, the 4070 Ti Super, if you compare a $949 4080 Super to a 4070 Ti Super, those often are, close to that price, $900, $800. If you get a cheap MSRP one, maybe $799. So you're talking about $150 difference perhaps. And while both will have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, the 4080 Super is still the better GPU. So if you're talking about spending that much already, I would say go for the 4080 Super over the 4070 Ti, especially if you can get it under $1,000. It's still going to be a fantastic GPU, DLSS 3. It's fairly efficient, very powerful GPU. It would only make sense to downgrade if you get a significantly cheaper GPU and you save a few $100s extra, and that would mean like a 4070 Super, but then you're getting a downgrade in performance as well as in the VRAM. You're going to get down to 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but if you can find a $599 4070 Super, compared to a $950 4080 Super or even a $1,000 4080 Super, then that's like a $350 to $400 difference. That's fairly significant, especially considering you can find 4070 Supers for under $600. I've seen them for like $580 or thereabouts. That's a pretty big price gap, maybe approaching, $400 difference. Then it's significant. If it's like 100 or 150 between the 4070 Ti Super and 4080 Super, I would say just go for the 4080 Super. So the 4070 Ti Super is interesting, so am I saying just skip it in general? If the price is too close to the 4080 Super, it just doesn't make sense. And if it gets cheaper, then it's a little bit better value, but it would have to be somewhere in the 750 range, I think, for it to make sense. Sometimes you may have sales that bring that down to that price. Then you're talking about at least a $200 difference between that and the 4080 Super. That makes a little bit more sense, but definitely the 4070 Super seems to be the sweet spot if you want to downgrade from that ultimate performance. Remember, if you plan to upgrade to RTX 50 series, you're going to lose less on the GPU the lower that you go. If you get a 4090, it's going to drop in price a lot more, most likely, when the new stuff comes out. That's what I think. I think the 4080 Super is a really good GPU, especially when you get it on sale. The cheaper price makes it a lot more attractive. It's probably a better buy than the 4070 Ti Super, and if you really don't want to spend that much and still get a great GPU, 4070 Super. Obviously, you can also look at the different AMD GPUs, but then you're going to be missing out on maybe better ray tracing performance in DLSS 3, but you can find 7900 XTXs and GPUs like that for near the price of the 4080 Super, so that's something else to keep in mind. Alright guys, let me know what you think down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.